For nearly 3 centuries, Egypt was ruled by a dynasty that was both deeply Egyptian and unmistakably Greek. This was the Ptolemaic Kingdom, founded after the death of Alexander the Great and ending only with Cleopatra VII. It was the final dynasty of ancient Egypt, but it was not native Egyptian in origin. Its rulers were Macedonian Greeks who inherited one of the richest lands in the ancient world and then had to solve a difficult political problem. How could foreign kings rule Egypt without being rejected by the people, the temples, and the old traditions that gave Egyptian monarchy its sacred authority? Their answer shaped one of the most fascinating periods in ancient history. They ruled as Greek kings, called basileus, while also presenting themselves as pharaohs. They built Greek cities, spoke Greek in government, and supported Greek science and learning, yet they also restored Egyptian temples, honored Egyptian gods, and adopted rituals that linked them to the ancient pharaonic past. The Ptolemaic Kingdom was not a simple blending of two cultures. It was a carefully managed empire of power, wealth, identity, and survival. The story begins with Alexander the Great's conquest of Egypt in 332 BC. At the time, Egypt was under the control of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Alexander's arrival was not just another military campaign, it was the start of a new political order. He entered Egypt as a conqueror, but also as a liberator from Persian rule in the eyes of many Egyptians. He founded the city of Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast, choosing a location that could connect Egypt to the wider Greek world, the Eastern Mediterranean, and international trade routes. Alexandria would later become the capital of the Ptolemaic Kingdom and one of the most important cities of the ancient world. But Alexander did not remain in Egypt for long. His empire stretched from Greece to Egypt and deep into Asia, and he continued his campaigns eastward. When he died suddenly in 323 BC, he left behind a vast empire but no stable succession plan. That uncertainty would tear his empire apart and create the opportunity for Ptolemy to take Egypt for himself. After Alexander's death, his generals and closest companions, known as the Diadochi, fought over the pieces of his empire. These were not minor disputes over territory. They were wars for legitimacy, wealth, and control of the future of the Hellenistic world. Ptolemy, one of Alexander's trusted generals, understood the value of Egypt immediately. Unlike some of the more exposed regions of Alexander's empire, Egypt had strong natural defenses, enormous agricultural wealth, and a long tradition of centralized administration. The Nile made the country productive, predictable, and taxable. Whoever controlled Egypt controlled grain, money, and strategic access to the Mediterranean and Red Sea worlds. Ptolemy first governed Egypt as a satrap, but over time he acted more and more independently. In 305 BC, he declared himself king, founding the Ptolemaic dynasty. This was not simply a local Egyptian kingdom reborn. It was a new Hellenistic state, ruled by Macedonian elites, tied to the legacy of Alexander, and built on the resources of ancient Egypt. Ptolemy I had to build more than a throne. He had to build legitimacy. For Greek soldiers and settlers, his claim rested on his connection to Alexander and his success as a military ruler. For Egyptians, however, kingship had a much older and more sacred meaning. Pharaoh was not merely a political title. It was tied to the gods, the temples, the cosmic order, and the proper functioning of the land. The Ptolemies therefore adopted Egyptian royal imagery and had themselves shown on monuments in traditional Egyptian style. On temple walls, they could appear like earlier pharaohs, making offerings to Egyptian gods. At the same time, in court culture and administration, they remained Greek monarchs. This dual identity was practical. It allowed the rulers to speak two political languages at once, one to the Greek ruling class that controlled the army and bureaucracy, and another to the Egyptian priesthood and population whose cooperation was essential. The dynasty survived because it learned to wear both crowns. Alexandria became the visible heart of this new kingdom. Founded by Alexander but developed under the Ptolemies, it was designed as a Greek polis on Egyptian soil. Its location on the Mediterranean made it a bridge between Egypt and the wider world. Ships brought goods, scholars, diplomats, soldiers, and ideas. The city became famous for its wealth, its architecture, and its intellectual life. It was not simply an administrative capital, it was a statement about what the Ptolemies wanted their kingdom to be. Egypt's grain and taxes funded a court that attracted poets, scientists, philosophers, and engineers. Alexandria's libraries and institutions helped make it one of the greatest centers of learning in antiquity. This mattered politically as well as culturally. By turning Alexandria into a beacon of Greek civilization, the Ptolemies claimed leadership in the Hellenistic world. They were not just foreign rulers of Egypt, they were patrons of knowledge and culture, competing with other successor kingdoms for prestige. The wealth of Ptolemaic Egypt came from a highly organized state. The kingdom inherited Egypt's long tradition of bureaucracy and expanded it for Hellenistic purposes. Agriculture was the foundation. The Nile's annual cycles made Egypt one of the most productive grain regions in the ancient Mediterranean. The Ptolemaic state managed land, taxation, labor, and production with remarkable intensity. This system enriched the crown and supported armies, fleets, building programs, temples, and the royal court. But the benefits were not shared equally. A Greek ruling class dominated the highest levels of military, political, and economic life. Greek was the language of government and trade, and Greek settlers often enjoyed advantages within the system. Native Egyptians continued to play important roles, especially in local administration and religious institutions, but access to central power was limited and often required Hellenization. The kingdom's prosperity therefore rested on both administrative genius and social hierarchy. It was efficient, but it was also unequal. Religion was one of the most important tools of Ptolemaic rule. The dynasty could not govern Egypt successfully while ignoring the temples, priests, and gods that anchored Egyptian society. Beginning especially under Ptolemy II Philadelphus, the rulers invested heavily in Egyptian religious life. They restored old temples, built new ones, and gave patronage to the priesthood. These actions were not only acts of devotion. They were acts of statecraft. Temples were economic centers, cultural centers, and local power bases. By supporting them, the Ptolemies gained recognition from influential Egyptian institutions. The dynasty also adopted certain Egyptian royal customs, including sibling marriage, which could be framed through divine models such as Osiris and Isis. To modern audiences this can seem shocking, but within the royal ideology of the time it helped present the ruling family as sacred, exceptional, and separate from ordinary society. Religion gave foreign kings an Egyptian face and helped make their rule feel continuous with the ancient past. At its height, the Ptolemaic Kingdom was one of the strongest powers in the Mediterranean. Under rulers such as Ptolemy III Euergetes, Egypt projected influence far beyond the Nile Valley. The kingdom held or contested territories in eastern Libya, the Sinai, northern Nubia, and parts of the eastern Mediterranean world. Its greatest rival was often the Seleucid Empire, another major Hellenistic state born from Alexander's conquests. The Syrian wars between the Ptolemies and Seleucids were struggles for strategic territory, trade routes, prestige, and dynastic advantage. These conflicts show that Ptolemaic Egypt was not isolated behind desert borders. It was an active imperial power, deeply involved in the politics of the Hellenistic world. The navy, the army, and the treasury allowed the Ptolemies to compete for influence across the region. Egypt's wealth made ambition possible, and ambition made conflict almost inevitable. For a time, the dynasty seemed capable of turning Egypt into the leading successor state of Alexander's fragmented empire. Yet the same system that made the Ptolemaic kingdom powerful also contained weaknesses. The dynasty depended heavily on royal stability, bureaucratic control, and the loyalty of privileged elites. When the royal family was strong, the machine worked. When the royal family fractured, the entire kingdom suffered. From the mid-2nd century BC, dynastic strife became increasingly damaging. Rival claimants, court intrigues, disputed successions, and internal conflicts weakened the monarchy. Foreign wars also drained resources and exposed the limits of Ptolemaic power. The relationship between the Greek ruling class and the native Egyptian population remained complex, sometimes cooperative and sometimes tense. Over time, Egyptians gained more influence in parts of the bureaucracy, especially if they adopted Greek language and practices, but the social divide never disappeared. The kingdom was a brilliant construction, but it required constant management. Once the rulers became divided and external pressure increased, the Ptolemaic state began to lose the commanding position it had enjoyed in earlier centuries. As Ptolemaic power declined, Rome rose. At first, Roman involvement in the eastern Mediterranean could appear useful to weaker Hellenistic rulers. Rome could be an ally, a mediator, or a counterweight against rivals. But dependence on Rome was dangerous. The Roman Republic was becoming the dominant military and political force in the Mediterranean, and its influence over Egypt grew steadily. Ptolemaic rulers increasingly needed Roman approval, Roman support, or Roman protection to secure their own positions. This changed the nature of Egyptian independence. The kingdom still had its monarchs, its wealth, and its traditions, but its freedom of action was narrowing. Egypt was too valuable for Rome to ignore. Its grain, money, and strategic location made it one of the great prizes of the ancient world. By the time Cleopatra VII came to power, she inherited not the confident empire of Ptolemy III, but a vulnerable kingdom surrounded by Roman ambition and internal dynastic instability. Cleopatra VII is often remembered through romance and legend, but politically she was the last serious defender of Ptolemaic independence. She understood that Egypt's survival depended on navigating Roman power. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony were not simply personal stories, they were part of a larger struggle over Egypt's place in a Roman-dominated world. Cleopatra sought to restore Ptolemaic strength and preserve her kingdom's autonomy, but she became entangled in Rome's civil wars. When Antony and Cleopatra were defeated by Octavian, the future Augustus, the Ptolemaic kingdom could no longer survive. In 30 BC, Cleopatra died, and Egypt was absorbed into the Roman world. This marked the end of the last independent Hellenistic kingdom and the end of the final dynasty of ancient Egypt. The pharaonic tradition, already transformed under Greek rule, now passed into a new imperial framework. Egypt became a Roman province, but its wealth and cultural importance did not disappear. The legacy of the Ptolemaic kingdom lasted long after Cleopatra. Under Rome, Egypt became one of the empire's richest provinces, and Alexandria remained a major center of Greek culture, learning, and trade. Greek continued as a language of government and commerce for centuries, surviving even into later periods before the Muslim conquest in 641 AD transformed Egypt again. The Ptolemies matter because they show how ancient empires adapted rather than simply replaced one another. Their kingdom was built from Alexander's conquest, Egyptian sacred kingship, Greek urban culture, bureaucratic extraction, temple politics, and Mediterranean imperial rivalry. It was both a continuation of ancient Egypt and a new Hellenistic creation. Its rulers were outsiders who learned to govern through local symbols, but they also preserved their own elite identity. That tension made the Ptolemaic kingdom powerful, creative, and unstable. It gave the world Alexandria, Cleopatra, and one of history's clearest examples of how culture and power can merge without ever becoming fully equal. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.